business cycles. Yeah. The business cycles.
I know due to our time constraints that we're only able to dip into a sliver of the complex issues around women at work. I know I can look back on my career and remember points in time where I wasn't getting it. I didn't have the level of self-awareness or even emotional capacity to deal with some of the difficult people and situations I've encountered. Luckily, I've had some wonderful people who've helped me learn and grow either through their mentorship or from their example. I'm also a huge proponent of personal development, and by nature of this work, I've also come to better understand myself, my triggers, my window of tolerance, and ways I can both regulate emotions and expand that window through increased resiliency. As I grow and evolve, windows open, and I find myself interacting with new people, many of whom have more to teach me. So I subscribe to the keep leveling up model because I think that's my purpose here, and because I know it will make me better, both professionally and personally. So some high-level recommendations on the back of this topic today. One, again, work persona. I know we've been talking about this a lot on the show, and I think there's a reason for it. As we've discussed, women have unique workplace challenges. Firstly, some women have been socialized to be more likely to exhibit accommodating, agreeable, and deferential ways of being. U.S. work cultures have historically been very masculine, rewarding aggressiveness, domination, and winner-takes-all behaviors. These are, of course, general and broad in nature, but the fact remains that women today are still battling bias and discrimination. I know I personally have felt the double-edged sword: be too emotional, deferential, and/or cooperative, and you don't come across as credible, capable, and experienced. On the other hand, be direct, unemotional, and assertive, and you're a bitch. A lot of this depends on your company's culture, but also that of your direct leadership team and the extent to which they see and value you and will back you up when the time comes. And in my experience, the time usually comes. Unfortunately for women, we often struggle with perceptions even in our personal lives. There's a message that we are just too much, whatever the much represents in a given context. So here, there's an important distinction to be made. First, do not conflate your persona with who you feel yourself to be. Most of us are still getting to know ourselves honestly, so I would expect that you may still be figuring that part out too. And that's okay, but do figure it out. In the meantime, design your work persona. We have an episode on this. I'll put a link in the comments. Your work persona should evolve in line with your role, seniority, work culture, and your leadership team. It should also be designed with some general idea of the end in mind. Not everyone wants to climb the ladder to CEO. Let's say you love your job as an independent contributor doing web design because it allows you to tap into your creative and technical expertise. Well, then do that. Be mindful if you're going with the flow too much, and manage your career based on what ultimately serves you, not some artificial, self-imposed roadmap to a place which would ultimately make you miserable. For women, part of persona design should include your comfort in reacting and responding to challenges about your interpersonal style. For example, I have had the experience where I was told flatly, "You're too smart and solve things too fast. You're making other people feel bad." I had to honestly evaluate this feedback and challenge myself as to its legitimacy. Ultimately, I decided that what was in question was foundational to who I am and a good part of my professional value. I determined that I needed to acknowledge and appreciate the feedback, but not accept it. My response was that if I'm too much, then you should probably go find someone who's less. Women, particularly senior women, are often given a lot of interpersonal feedback, which can be confusing for successful executives who understand the value of continuous self-improvement. Don't allow others to tell you who you are. Be thoughtful about your boundaries and what can be improved versus a situation where there isn't a cultural fit. Otherwise, you'll find yourself on the defense, overly focusing on these kinds of criticisms versus focusing on playing and winning the game. 2, develop a career map and then continuously revisit and revise. As with the example of the web designer, women often don't receive quality career mentorship and guidance. Performance reviews often focus on your current role relative to opportunities to expand power, influence, and, of course, compensation. But all of this is different than career coaching. It also doesn't include personal goals and responsibilities. Women typically carry more of the burden for caring for family than men. This trend is evident across various cultures and countries, influenced by traditional gender roles and societal expectations. According to the International Labor Organization, women perform 76% of the total hours of unpaid care work, about 3 times as much as men. Women's disproportionate burden of unpaid work affects their careers, causing many to work part-time or leave the workforce altogether. The imbalance also contributes to the gender pay gap, as women often take lower paying flexible jobs that accommodate family needs. And all these complexities, they lead to higher levels of stress, burnout, and mental health issues among women. Sure, you're an employee and a wife and a mother, but as a human being, who are you? What do you want out of your life? What are the kinds of activities which resonate with your truest nature? Figure that out and then do more of these things. While it may require years of sacrifice, don't give too much of yourself away and always make sure you're valuing your health and wellness above all else. And finally, number 3, invest in yourself. As women, many of us often are naturally externally focused, sensitive to helping others. Some of the most beautiful and celebrated aspects of feminine energy include nurturing, generosity, and sacrifice, sometimes to an unhealthy extent. Turning attention to oneself can sometimes make women feel uncomfortable or guilty. We feel selfish and greedy, giving ourselves what we give others so freely. From a professional standpoint, we need to get over this. Investing in your professional interests might mean a new work wardrobe, a women's professional retreat, or executive coaching. It might just simply mean that every night for 1 hour you turn off your phone and close your door and read a book that inspires you. Whatever the right answer is for you, this isn't a birthday present you're giving yourself. Start to normalize investing in yourself in every and all ways that make sense to you. The key to thinking about this is the term investment. I didn't say gift. Do not mistake these types of activities as indulgences. Self-care, self-development, and self-actualization are investments in your success, both personally and professionally. And I'll end with this quote by Maya Angelou. A woman in harmony with her spirit is like a river flowing. She goes where she will without pretense and arrives at her destination prepared to be herself.
Ooh, that was so good, Mary. Just one of the thoughts that popped up, that personal feedback thing is part of a larger issue that is the underdevelopment of managers and leaders. A lot of people in positions where they oversee people and they have not been properly trained and developed to develop their staff. And so as a result of that, they just kind of make their personal observations and they can't differentiate from the fact that that's their biases. And quite frankly, is like loaded with all kinds of potential liabilities for the company. I have a couple tips here to close things out. And there's a bit about this in the Parinomi method in terms of like the differentiation between female, feminine, and masculine tendencies. Is the way I see it is like masculine is very transactional. It's really like give, take, give, take. It's the language of business. And that more feminine or female, is actually more relational. It's understanding how things affect other things. I think most people can recall examples of being in meetings and be like, yeah, but if we do this, these are the things that are going to happen. You're like the wet blanket. There is a predominant language in business, and that is transaction. And one of the things that I would offer up as a tip is to speak in that language, is to learn how to translate into that language. So it's learn how to translate relation into transaction. Learn how to, when you're saying like, wow, the team is so cohesive and everybody's really motivated and it's been really wonderful. And it's kind of like, nope, talk about the outputs. It feels so real because you're like, I understand why this is happening and I'm trying to tell you why this is happening. But it's like, guess what? In this language, all we talk about is transaction. That's the language. And I think that's one of the things that can be really frustrating because what you're saying is true. And in some ways is speaking to a larger, more powerful contextual force that's driving an organization forward. But guess what? Not the language that's being spoken. I think that's a really key thing. I was once speaking on a panel And somebody had asked the question about confidence. So it was going down the panel, and everyone's kind of like serving up this kind of like, you belong there. So, assert yourself with confidence and and it got to me and I was like, well, you actually don't belong there. This, there's a reason you're the only, there's one woman and like 10 men in the room. And by the way, it was designed by them. And the fact that you being in the room is kind of a bummer, because once again, back to what we talked about in the previous episode, it's kind of like, hey, it's really comfortable and we can just kind of talk about dude stuff, in sports. But now there's this person here and it's like, is she going to make this not fun anymore? And anybody who wants to dispute that with me, I am available. In terms of asserting yourself with confidence, let's have a real conversation about this. Let's have a real conversation about how these organizations are structured and how to function in them. So the advice that I'd given on that panel actually had to do with like how you hold yourself. Instead of making it a psychological thing of believing you belong there, exercising and finding that kind of internal uprightness and strength and taking up space and learning how to become comfortable with that. Because if we're shrinking, we're literally signaling to ourselves lack of confidence. So it's really practicing that before you're in the boardroom, before you're in the meetings, is learning how to occupy space and composure that's physical, and find that in yourself. Also, assertiveness isn't about being aggressive. I think this is a really important point. And you pointed to this in what you were saying. And it's about, communicating clearly, standing your ground when necessary. Staying dispassionate, but with conviction in your delivery can be so important. Make sure your ideas and contributions are heard and recognized, but also pick your battles. Some of the other stuff, setting boundaries. Boundaries are impossible to enforce if you aren't even clear about what they should be. Establishing what your boundaries are, and resist being pigeonholed into roles or tasks that don't align and support being respected. Clearly define your professional boundaries and enforce them to the extent that is reasonable. This includes setting limits on your availability and avoiding unnecessary personal discussions. But another thing that you pointed to, Mary, is building and leveraging a support network. And this goes back to, stories that, in our short form didn't make it in here, but there have been men who have taken stands for me that made all the difference in the world. I have one example where I was being treated terribly by a very misogynistic guy, and another executive stepped in and said, I think this is absolutely wrong. Cultivate relationships with mentors, allies, and other supportive colleagues. Try to keep it diversified. Ages, seniority levels. Having a strong network can provide valuable advice and emotional support and can help amplify your voice in the workplace, but also having allies and mentors outside of work that you can talk about your situations with, and they can offer you guidance and perspective that can really support you stepping back into the situation with renewed confidence. Networking isn't just about advancing your career, it's about creating a circle of support that can offer guidance and solidarity.
Hey, fellow psychos, if you enjoyed the show, please click like, subscribe, and share it with other psychos you know. We'd also love to hear from you, so please hit us up on our socials. We're at Business Psychos Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.